Well, we know that over the past several years, with school being both in person and being virtual, and with school be and with all the impacts that that has had on our classroom, on our teachers, on our students as well, that it's certainly affected academics not only in Michigan but all across the country. We have some recent data too that's just came out on how that specifically affected students right here in Michigan. And joining us to talk about those numbers, as well as what school districts across the state and superintendents across the state in particular are doing to counteract some of those lasting effects of the pandemic on our education system, is Dr. Tina Kerr, the executive director of the Michigan Association of Superintendents and Administrators, on today's edition of the Megacast. Dr. Kerr, thanks for being with us again.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good to have you with us. Of course, we know that COVID-19 has had a major impact on schools across the U.S. and across the nation. We've talked in the past about the disparities in some of those effects from those issues on schools and in lower income areas, but across the state, some very staggering numbers. We just last week had discussed on this program and in our headline segment an article from Isabel Lohman and Mike Wilkinson at Bridge, Michigan, about the recent release of NAEP numbers, or National Assessment of Educational Progress numbers, from 2019 through this year, that show that Michigan's test scores, in particular in reading and math, fell to their lowest scores in over 30 years. That's quite a staggering number, and certainly you think about the impacts of the varying changes in the school systems over the course of the pandemic as being a primary culprit for all that. So let's start with where teachers and where administrators are at this moment in time, as we're about in the middle of the school year, approaching the middle of the school year here in the state of Michigan, well into it, all our schools back fully in person, with some, of course, still having some other options as well for students and families that would prefer not to be in that in-person classroom. But by and large, where are our schools at in terms of getting back into the fold of things and really bringing these classrooms back to a more traditional in-person learning environment, but also adjusting for what they've learned over the last couple of years?
Sure. Thanks, Tyler. Well, all our schools started this fall with the intent to come back face to face and in person. But as you said, some of our districts found that some students did learn effectively with a virtual option. So you're seeing some hybrid opportunities in districts, but for the most part, our schools began the school year back in person, still trying to keep in mind those safety precautions, because obviously COVID is still lurking around. But certainly, I think that there was a new optimism and hope for the start of this school year.
Yeah, and that optimism and hope, a lot of that also comes from where we were at with our learning and with our education system here in the state of Michigan pre-pandemic. We talk about those NAEP numbers and some of those staggering faults and those numbers over the last 3 years between 2019 and 2022. But before that, in the 3 years prior, Michigan showed considerable improvement in those NAEP testing scores compared to the rest of the nation too. So there was something that was really positive going on in our classrooms pre-pandemic that hopefully is going to be coming back and continues to be coming back and having an effect as we go forward. On the administrative level, what do you do as a superintendent or as an administrator, particularly as you're looking at the controversies of learning loss, and certainly these numbers from these testing institutions that help to kind of be a little bit of a guidepost throughout the year and year to year, in terms of sort of bridging those gaps while you're also continuing on with this learning at a normal rate?
There's kind of three big, I think I'd call them buckets that administrators are working through. The first of which is just academic recovery strategies. I don't like to call it learning loss. We like to call it delayed learning, because the pandemic did delay the learning that was occurring in classrooms due to the virtual options or other mitigating circumstances. The second piece is the needed legislative action, and we as an association are very focused on that. Then I would say the third part is really the reality of what we're dealing with in regards to the educator shortage in our state. That certainly has had a dramatic impact, especially when you talk about our scores improving previous to the pandemic. As we saw the pandemic come, we did see a decline again in our qualified educators that we had supporting our students. So we're going to focus on how do we work on those three things to help increase student learning and recover from this delayed learning that occurred during the pandemic.
Is that something that you and that other superintendents across the state of Michigan that are associated with MASA believe it can be done in a rather expedient manner? Because on the one hand, you're trying to make up for some of that delayed learning that occurred as a result of the constraints of the pandemic, whether it be virtual learning or outside circumstances and concerns that were faced not only here in Michigan but across the country and across the world. But at the same time, not necessarily rushing to play catch up on this education at the same time, which can also have a significant effect on the kids' education and the quality of their learning.
Sure. We're kidding ourselves to think that this might happen overnight. It certainly won't. It is going to take a long period of time. And some of the things that we're looking at are going to need time to actually show their impact. The one thing I will say that's been in our favor as we think about these recovery strategies, a lot of our districts, thanks to us receiving $6 billion in federal funding to help students and staff recover from the pandemic, a lot of those funds are being used for investment in high intense tutoring programs. We're seeing extended summer schools, which usually helped us deal with summer school loss, but now can also help us move forward with the delayed learning that happened during the pandemic. And then we're seeing a lot of districts that are creating their own grow your own programs. We had another 12 million that was invested in creating these programs to get parapros that may want to be classroom teachers and moving people through the ranks quicker, but with a high quality education so that, again, as you said, we don't want to do anything to set us back academically. We are constantly trying to move forward and give the supports that we need in the classroom.
We're joined by Dr. Tina Kerr. She is the executive director of the Michigan Association of Superintendents and Administrators, or MASA, joining us on today's edition of the Megacast. You can learn more information about MASA as well as find some of the resources, advocacy, and upcoming events as well by going to their website, gomasa.org, GOMASA.org for more information, GOMASA or gomasa.org for more information. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier. It's important that we circle back to this, Dr. Kerr, as you're considering all these different mitigation efforts and initiatives in order to bridge some of those gaps in the delayed learning in our classrooms. I would imagine it's that much tougher to do that in a school district that's in a lower income area, a higher poverty area that already had been previously before the pandemic suffering for resources from the state, from the federal government as well to provide some of these services. Of course, you got a lot of the federal funding that came through the schools as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as from the state, certainly going to be helpful in that regard. But what are organizations like yours doing to help those school districts that are in areas of most need academically and from a resources standpoint, even pre-pandemic, to bridge some of these gaps when they do have significantly fewer resources than those school districts and those students in more affluent areas?
I will say I agree with you, Tyler, that that has been ongoing when we talk about resources. We have long been advocates for leveling the playing field as far as financially for students. In this past summer's unprecedented education budget, you saw funding start to go to those subgroups that needed more attention and needed more resources, such as our ELL, our high poverty areas, our special education, et cetera. So I do feel like we've made significant gains to have the funding follow the needs of the child in those districts. But as an association, certainly one of the things we continue to do is by servicing over 95% of the superintendents in Michigan, we are always looking for ways to ensure that that learning that occurs at the association level for the superintendents is directly has an impact in their particular district setting, whether it be small rural or urban suburban. We want to try and make sure our professional development opportunities meet them where their needs are.
Again, we're joined by Dr. Tina Kerr, the Executive Director of the Michigan Association of Superintendents and Administrators. On today's edition of the Megacast, you can find more information on all of their work by visiting gomasa.org, gomasa.org, for more information, including their partners, some advocacy work, resources on COVID-19, job postings across the state, workshops, and more. Gomasa.org, as well as a calendar for their upcoming events as well. Dr. Kerr, in terms of the educator's standpoint, of course, your organization working with superintendents and administrators, but under them in the chain of command, are those people on the front lines in our classroom each and every day, teaching our kids and helping to enact these different plans and different initiatives to bridge those gaps in the delayed learning all across the state of Michigan. So what more needs to be done at the administrative level? Or are you suggesting for administrators and certainly superintendents, to attract new talent right here in the state of Michigan, but also to retain those excellent members of their staff and their faculty in their facilities and keep them in the industry, where we've seen over the past few years many very talented employees and educators across the state, due to the stresses of that job, the constraints of that job, and the situation that we're in educationally here in Michigan and across the country, have left the profession altogether.
That's absolutely correct. And there's a lot of factors that obviously added to that. What we're trying to do is support our administrators as they work to alleviate the stress that educators are under. We talked about students' health and well being during the pandemic, but just as important has been the staff and the educators, as you said, on the front lines, their health and well being. You're seeing a lot of districts that are trying to implement more on-site wellness programs, trying to ensure that their staff have safe outlets to go and have conversations. But we're also seeing, again, with the educator shortages plaguing our state and the nation, we're having to look at other opportunities how to attract people to the profession. Uh, Quality, competitive wage, certainly, as you said, those supports that are in place to ensure that they have a positive culture and can have a positive impact in the classroom. We've seen our governor and our legislature are certainly trying to put money to attract more people to the profession, but it's also up to each community to make a difference in those schools. And while the administrators can control so much, it's certainly about, does a teacher come to a district or a community and do they feel like they're at home? And a lot of the stresses that have happened that we've seen politically on a national level have certainly trickled down into the communities in Michigan. So again, it's imperative that we all work together to ensure that our educators in our schools feel safe, feel valued, feel protected, and that they can earn a decent living to support the students that are in their classrooms.
Yeah, teaching, educating is a partnership between those educators and the families, as well as the students, administrators, and superintendents as well. It's all one big partnership at the community level. So community involvement always going to be critical in all these matters, especially with the challenges we face today. Dr. Kerr, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you and have a great day.